Captain Daniel Harper had been in space for 7 years, but nothing had prepared him for what appeared on his screen that morning. The Earth defense ship Valiant was on routine patrol near the outer colonies when the encrypted message arrived without warning. It came from deep within Galactic Council territory, and the encryption was unlike anything their systems had seen before. Lieutenant Karen Wells was the first to notice the transmission. She called Daniel to the communications station with urgency in her voice. Her hands moved across the holographic display as she worked to decode the message. The file was massive and heavily protected, but whoever sent it had included a decryption key. That alone told Daniel this was important. No one sent keys unless they wanted the message read. It took Karen 20 minutes to fully decrypt the file. When the contents finally appeared on the main screen, Daniel felt his blood run cold. The document was a complete record of a secret Galactic Council session held 3 cycles ago. The header read Threat Assessment and Extinction Protocol for Species. Designation Human. Daniel read the words again to make sure he understood them correctly. Extinction Protocol. They were talking about wiping out humanity. Commander Peter Grant joined them on the bridge and read over Daniel's shoulder. His face went pale as he scrolled through page after page of clinical assessments and debate records. The Council had spent hours discussing whether humanity should be allowed to continue existing. They had listed reasons why humans were dangerous. Too aggressive. Too curious. Too willing to challenge authority. Too fast at developing new technology. The conclusion was clear. Humanity posed a long-term threat to galactic stability and order. The vote had been close, but it had passed. 17 council members voted in favor of the Extinction Protocol. 14 voted against it. 3 abstained. The protocol authorized covert military action to eliminate human colonies and prevent Earth from sending more ships into space. The timeline called for action to begin within 5 cycles. That meant humanity had less than 2 years before the attacks would start. Karen verified the documents using every method she knew. She checked digital signatures against known council encryption patterns. She analyzed the metadata for signs of tampering. She cross-referenced the timestamps with public council records and found a 6-hour gap that matched exactly when this secret session would have occurred. Every test came back positive. The documents were real. Daniel sat in his command chair trying to process what this meant. The Galactic Council was supposed to be a forum for peace and cooperation between species. Humans had worked for decades to earn a seat at their table. Earth had followed every rule and regulation. They had limited their expansion to avoid conflict. They had shared technology and culture. And in return, the Council had secretly voted to exterminate them. The message included more than just the vote records. It contained communications between council members discussing how to carry out the attacks. They planned to make it look like accidents or natural disasters. A plague here. A reactor failure there. Slow enough that humans would not realize they were under attack until it was too late. The level of detail was chilling. These were not abstract plans. They were operational orders waiting to be executed. Peter pulled up the final section of the files. It contained a personal message from the individual who leaked the documents. The name was Kessa, and she identified herself as a junior diplomatic attaché from the Varani species. Her message was brief, but powerful. She wrote that she had watched the Council commit atrocities in the name of stability for too long. The Varani had suffered under Council oppression for generations. She could not stand by and watch another species be destroyed in secret. She knew that sending these files would cost her everything but some things. It mattered more than personal safety. Daniel made a decision. He ordered Karen to make copies of everything and prepare burst transmissions to Earth and all human colonies. This information had to reach humanity's leadership immediately. But he also knew they needed to be careful. If the Council learned that their secret was exposed, they might accelerate their timeline. The element of surprise was the only advantage humanity had. Right. Now Karen worked quickly to encrypt the files for transmission. She used every security protocol in their database. The messages would be scattered across multiple channels and reassembled only when they reached their destinations. It would take the Council days to intercept and decode them even if they noticed the transmissions. That would give Earth time to respond. While Karen worked on the communications, Daniel called a meeting with his senior officers. Lieutenant Jake Morrison from Tactical arrived first, followed by Dr. Amy Chen from the Medical Bay, and Chief Engineer Ben Torres. Daniel showed them the files without commentary. He watched their faces change as they read. Disbelief turned to anger. Anger turned to fear. Fear turned to determination. Jake spoke first. He wanted to know if this was some kind of elaborate hoax or propaganda. Daniel understood the question. It was easier to believe this was fake than to accept that the entire Galactic Council had conspired to commit genocide. But the evidence was overwhelming. These were genuine council documents, and they painted a terrifying picture of humanity's future. Amy asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What were they supposed to do now? They were one ship with a crew of 300. The Galactic Council commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands. Even if every human ship united, they would be outnumbered and outgunned. Fighting a conventional war against the Council would be suicide. Ben suggested they focus on what they could control. The leak was out. The truth would spread. That changed everything. The Council had voted in secret because they knew their decision would be unpopular. If other species learned what happened, there would be consequences. The galaxy was not united behind the Council's actions. There were fractures and resentments that humanity could exploit, Daniel agreed. Their job now was to make sure this information reached as many people as possible. Not just humans, but every species in the galaxy. The Council had made their plans in darkness. Humanity's best weapon was to drag those plans into the light. Let the galaxy judge for itself whether extinction was justice or murder. The transmissions went out an hour later. Compressed data packets shot across space toward Earth and the colonies. Daniel included a personal message to Director Helen, Maurice at the Diplomatic Corps. She would know what to do with the information. She had spent years building relationships with other species and understanding council politics. If anyone could turn this disaster into an opportunity, it was her. As the last transmission cleared the Valiant's arrays, Daniel stood and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council was planning humanity's end. But they had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated the power of truth and the courage of individuals like Kessa, who refused to accept injustice. The secret was out now, and there was no putting it back. The galaxy would have to choose sides, and Daniel intended to make sure humanity was ready for whatever came next. Director Helen. Morris received the encrypted files at 3 a.m. Geneva time. Her personal communicator buzzed with an urgent priority code she had only seen twice in her career. She sat up in bed and opened the message from Captain Daniel Harper aboard the Valiant. The first few lines made her forget about sleep entirely. She moved to her home office and spent the next 2 hours reading through every document in this transmission. Her coffee went cold as she absorbed the clinical language describing humanity's planned elimination. The Council had debated their extinction the way corporate boards discussed quarterly earnings. There was no emotion in the text, no acknowledgement that they were discussing the deaths of billions of living beings. Just cold calculations. It's about threat levels and resource allocation. Helen had worked in diplomatic service for 23 years. She had negotiated treaties and resolved conflicts between species with vastly different values and worldviews. She prided herself on staying calm under pressure. But reading these files made her hands shake with rage. The Council had smiled at her in meetings while secretly planning to murder everyone she had ever known. By dawn, she had verified the authenticity of the documents using every contact she had in intelligence services. Every expert reached the same conclusion. The files were genuine. The digital signatures matched. The encryption was standard Council protocol. Someone inside their organization had risked everything to warn humanity about what was coming, Helen called. President Jacob Turner at 6 a.m. He answered on the second ring, already awake. She could hear the tension in his voice when she told him they needed an emergency meeting. Within an hour, she was in a secure conference room in the Earth Coalition. Headquarters with the President and his senior advisors. Secretary of Defense. Linda Hayes was the first to speak after reviewing the files. She wanted immediate military mobilization. every ship, every soldier, every defensive platform. If the Council was planning to attack, then Earth needed to be ready to fight back. Her voice was steady, but Helen could see the fear behind her eyes. Linda had 3 children and 5 grandchildren. The thought of them being casualties in a war of extermination was unbearable. Ambassador Stephen Clark disagreed strongly. He argued that mobilizing would confirm every fear the Council had about humanity being aggressive and warlike. It would give them justification to accelerate their timeline. Instead, he suggested quiet, diplomatic outreach to species who might oppose the Council's actions. Build a coalition. Apply pressure through political channels. Make the cost of attacking humanity too high for the Council to accept. President Turner listened to both arguments, then turned to Helen. He wanted her professional opinion. She had more experience dealing with the Council than anyone in the room. What did she think humanity should do? Helen chose her words carefully. She said that keeping this secret would be a mistake. The Council had acted in darkness because they knew their decision could not withstand public scrutiny. Humanity's best defense was not military force or quiet diplomacy. It was transparency. Release everything to the public. Let every species in the galaxy see what the Council had done. Force them to defend their actions in the light of day. The President asked about the risks. Helen admitted there were many. The Council might deny the documents were real. They might claim humanity fabricated them to cause chaos. Some species might support the Council's decision out of fear or self-interest. But she believed most species would be horrified. The galaxy was full of younger civilizations who could easily imagine themselves in humanity's position. If the Council could vote to exterminate humans in secret, then no one was safe. The debate continued for another hour, but eventually the President made his decision. The files would be released to the public within 24 hours. In the meantime, Helen would prepare a statement for the Galactic Assembly. Stephen would reach out to allied species and warn them what was coming. Linda would put Earth's defenses on quiet alert without making it obvious. Every precaution would be taken, but the truth would not be hidden. Helen spent the rest of the day crafting her statement. It needed to be perfect. Too aggressive, and she would alienate potential allies. Too weak, and humanity would look like victims begging for mercy. She wrote and rewrote the opening lines a dozen times before settling on something that felt right. The Galactic Council has betrayed the trust of every species in this galaxy. Today, we present evidence of that betrayal and demand justice. The files were released simultaneously across every human communications network and transmitted to all species with diplomatic relations to Earth. Helen had arranged for copies to be delivered to major news organizations representing 40 different civilizations. The Council would not be able to suppress this even if they tried. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Human colonies erupted in protests and demonstrations. People flooded the streets, demanding answers and protection. Some called for war. Others called for withdrawal from the Galactic Council entirely. The anger was palpable and growing by the hour, but something unexpected began to happen. Within 6 hours of the release, alien species started responding. The Thalan Collective issued a statement calling for an immediate investigation. The Draxan Empire announced that any attack on humanity would be considered an act of war against all sovereign species. The peaceful Minari declared they would withdraw all diplomatic relations with the Council until the matter was resolved. Helen watched the responses flood in from her office. Each new statement of support made her chest feel a little less tight. Humanity was not alone in this. The galaxy was waking up to what the Council had done, and many were not happy about it. The Varani government issued a particularly powerful statement. They confirmed that the leak had come from one of their citizens. They acknowledged that Kessa had violated her oath of service by releasing classified information. But they also declared that some oaths should be broken when keeping them meant complicity in genocide. They demanded the Council respond to the accusations and refused to hand Kessa over for punishment. By evening, over 200 species had issued statements, ranging from concern to outright condemnation. The Council's communication channels were overwhelmed with demands for explanation. They're carefully constructed. facade of unity and wisdom was crumbling in real time. Helen received a message from Ambassador Patricia Lane, who was stationed at Council. Prime Patricia reported that the Grand Assembly Hall was in chaos. Delegates were shouting at each other. Ancient alliances were fracturing. The High Chancellor had attempted to call an emergency session, but could not restore order long enough to begin. The Council had never experienced anything like this in its 1,000-year history. President Turner called Helen to his office as the sun set over Geneva. He looked exhausted, but there was hope in his eyes. He told her that early intelligence suggested the Council was divided on how to respond. Some members wanted to double down and deny everything. Others were quietly reaching out to human diplomats to express their opposition to the extinction protocol. The conspiracy was eating itself from within. Helen allowed herself a small smile. 24 hours ago, humanity had been alone and facing annihilation. Now the galaxy was demanding answers, and the Council was in disarray. This was not victory. The danger was far from over. But it was progress. It was hope. And sometimes hope was enough to build something stronger, she thought about. Kessa, the young Varani diplomat who had sacrificed everything to send that first message. One person with courage had changed the course of history. Helen made a silent promise to honor that courage by seeing this through to the end. The Council wanted to erase humanity in darkness. Instead, humanity had brought light to the entire galaxy. Now, they would see what happened when truth faced power and refused to back. Ambassador Patricia Lane had witnessed many tense moments in the Grand Elect Assembly Hall during her 6 years at Council, prime but nothing compared to the chaos unfolding before her eyes. Delegates from hundreds of species were shouting across the chamber floor. Some were demanding immediate answers from the Council leadership. Others were defending their right to make decisions about galactic security. The carefully maintained order that had existed for centuries was collapsing in real time. The High Chancellor stood at the central podium trying to restore calm. He was a towering figure from the ancient Krell species with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like polished stone. His voice carried naturally across vast spaces, but even he could not make himself heard over the tumult. Patricia watched him strike the ceremonial gong 3 times. The sound usually brought instant silence. Today it was ignored completely. Patricia had prepared for this moment since receiving the warning from Director Helen Morris. She knew the files would create a firestorm when they reached the Council. What she had not anticipated was how quickly the unity among species would fracture. Alliances that had stood for generations were being questioned. Trust that took decades to build was evaporating in hours. The Thalan delegation occupied the seats, but directly across from where Patricia stood. They were a species known throughout the galaxy for their philosophical wisdom and commitment to peaceful resolution. Their lead delegate was an elderly scholar named Ven, who had served on the Council for 40 years. He rose slowly from his seat in the chamber, gradually fell silent out of respect for his age and experience. Ven spoke in a clear voice that needed no amplification. He said that the Thalan Collective had reviewed the leaked documents with their finest legal minds and historians. The evidence was compelling and deeply troubling. If the accusations were true, then the Council had violated its own founding principles. The Charter explicitly forbade secret votes on matters of war or extermination. It required transparency and debate before any species could be targeted for military action. The proceedings described in the leaked files violated every one of those protections. He continued by saying that the Thalan people could not in good conscience remain part of an organization that conducted genocide in secret. Unless a full and independent investigation was launched immediately, the Thalan Collective would withdraw from the Council and encourage other species to do the same. His words landed like a bomb in the chamber. The Thalan were one of the founding members of the Council. Their departure would be catastrophic for the organization's legitimacy. The Draxan ambassador spoke next. Her species was warrior by nature, and had always viewed the Council's endless debates with barely concealed impatience. But they valued honor above all else, and the idea of secret votes to eliminate enemies offended their sense of proper conduct. She declared that the Draxan Empire would consider any covert action against humanity as an act of war against all free species. If the Council wanted to eliminate humans, They should have the courage to do it openly and accept the consequences. Patricia felt a surge of hope as she listened to species after species rise to condemn the secret vote. Not all of them were friendly to humanity. Some had competed with humans for resources or territory. But they recognized that if the Council could target humanity in secret today, they could target anyone tomorrow. Self-interest was proving to be humanity's unexpected ally. The High Chancellor finally managed to call for order. He acknowledged that the accusations were serious and deserved investigation. But he also warned against rushing to judgment based on documents that might have been altered or taken out of context. He proposed forming a special trib. You'll know to examine the evidence and determine its authenticity. The tribunal would include representatives from multiple species to ensure fairness. Patricia saw her opening. She requested permission to address the assembly, and after a moment of hesitation, the Chancellor granted it. She walked to the speaker's platform, aware that billions of beings across the galaxy were watching this session through live feeds. Her next words would matter enormously. She began by thanking the Chancellor for allowing her to speak. Then she presented the case methodically. Captain Daniel Harper of the Earth defense ship Valiant had received the leaked documents from an unknown source. Lieutenant Karen Wells had verified their authenticity using standard forensic methods. Every digital signature matched known Council protocols. The metadata was consistent with legitimate Council records. The timeline aligned perfectly with gaps in the public record. Patricia then addressed the elephant in the room. She acknowledged that Earth's government could have fabricated these documents, but she challenged anyone in the chamber to explain how humans could have obtained the correct encryption keys and digital signatures without inside help. The level of access required to create such convincing forgeries would mean the Council's security had already been completely compromised. Either the documents were real, or the Council had far bigger problems than false accusations. She concluded by stating that humanity did not want war or revenge. They wanted justice and accountability. If the Council had legitimate concerns about human expansion, those concerns should have been raised openly. Humans would have negotiated in good faith. Instead, the Council had chosen secret deliberations and planned extermination. That choice revealed more about the Council's character than any threat, assessment of humanity ever could. The chamber erupted again as Patricia returned to her seat. Some delegates applauded her statement. Others shouted objections. The High Chancellor looked genuinely shaken. He called for a vote on establishing the special tribunal. The measure passed with overwhelming support. Even species that privately agreed with the extinction protocol voted in favor. The political pressure was too great to resist. The next speaker was unexpected. A young Varani delegate requested the floor and was granted permission. She identified herself as Kessa and confirmed that she was the source of the leaked documents. A ripple of shock went through the chamber. By admitting her role publicly, Kessa had just signed her own death warrant under Council law. Leaking classified information carried a mandatory execution sentence, but Kessa stood straight and spoke without fear. She explained that she had joined the diplomatic corps because she believed in the Council's stated mission of peace and cooperation. She had grown up hearing stories of how the Council protected weaker species from exploitation. She wanted to be part of something noble and good. Then she had been assigned to work in the classified archives. Her job was to catalog and file sensitive documents. She had security clearance but was not supposed to read the files in detail. One day, while processing records from the secret session, she had seen the words extinction protocol and human species in the same sentence. Curiosity overcame caution, and she read the entire file. Kessa described the horror. She felt learning that the Council she admired had voted to commit genocide. She spent weeks agonizing over what to do. Reporting through official channels felt useless, since the people who would receive her complaint were the same ones who had authorized the protocol. She considered doing nothing and trying to forget what she had seen. But every time she closed her eyes, she imagined human children dying in fabricated accidents while the galaxy remained ignorant. Finally, she decided that some secrets were too dangerous to keep. She copied the files and sent them to the humans using an encrypted channel she had discovered while working in the archives. She knew it would cost her everything: her career, her freedom, probably her life. But she could not live with herself if she stayed silent. The chamber was completely quiet as Kessa finished speaking. Then something remarkable happened. The Thalan delegate Ven stood and began to applaud. Within seconds, dozens of other delegates joined him. Then hundreds. Species that had barely acknowledged each other for generations stood together applauding. A junior diplomat who had sacrificed everything for principle. The High Chancellor looked around the chamber with something like despair in his ancient eyes. He knew that this moment had changed everything. The council could not execute Kessa now. Not with half the galaxy watching and applauding her courage, and if they could not punish the leaker, they would have to address the substance of what she had leaked. Patricia caught Kessa's eye across the chamber and nodded with respect. One brave individual had done what entire governments could not. She had forced the council to confront its own corruption. The road ahead would be difficult and dangerous. But for the first time since this crisis began, Patricia believed that justice might actually be possible. The galaxy had seen the truth, and the galaxy was demanding answers. Now they would see if the council had the courage to provide them. Special Investigator Ryan Cole has been retired from military intelligence for 5 years when the call came. He was living quietly on a colony world, tending a garden and trying to forget the things he had seen during his career. But when the Galactic Council requested his services to lead the independent investigation into the leaked documents, he knew he could not refuse. This was too important to leave to politicians or bureaucrats who might have conflicts of interest. Ryan arrived at Council Prime with a team of 20 investigators representing different species. He had handpicked each member based on their reputation for integrity and their lack of connections to the Council's power structure. There was Agent Nicole Sanders from Earth, who had exposed 3 major corruption scandals during her career. There was Investigator Tarn from the Draxan Empire, who was famous for refusing bribes even when threatened with violence. Each member of the team understood that powerful forces would try to obstruct their work. The Council provided them with office space in a remote wing of the government complex. Ryan suspected this was intentional. Keeping them isolated would make it harder to gather information and easier to monitor their activities. But he had expected resistance from the start. People who voted to commit genocide in secret would not willingly cooperate with those investigating their crimes. Nicole began by requesting access to the Council's classified archives. The request was denied within an hour. The official reason was security concerns, but Ryan recognized a stall tactic when he saw one. He filed a formal complaint with the tribunal overseeing the investigation. The tribunal ordered the Council to provide access within 48 hours or face sanctions. The Council complied, but Nicole reported that entire sections of the archive had been redacted or removed. Ryan decided to approach the problem from a different. Instead of relying on documents that could be altered or destroyed, he would follow the money. Every covert operation required funding. Someone had to authorize payments for weapons and personnel and ships. Those transactions would leave traces in financial records. Finding them would be difficult, but not impossible. He assigned Nicole and 3 other investigators to track financial flows within the Council's budget over the past 10 years. They worked 18-hour days combing through millions of transactions looking for patterns. Most of the spending was legitimate. Salaries for diplomats, maintenance for facilities, standard operating costs. But buried deep in the records, they found irregularities. Large sums of money had been transferred to organizations with vague names and no clear purpose. The amounts were not huge by Council standards, but they were consistent. Every month for the past 8 years, funds had moved from classified Council accounts to these shadow groups. When Nicole tried to trace where the money went after the initial transfer, she hit walls. The organizations existed only on paper. They had no physical locations, no employees, no assets anyone could verify. Ryan brought in financial experts from 5 different species to analyze the pattern. They all reached the same conclusion. This was classic money laundering designed to fund covert operations. Someone was siphoning Council resources to pay for activities they did not want traced back to the government. The amounts matched what you would need to maintain small military units and intelligence networks. across multiple systems. While Nicole followed the money, Ryan sent other team members to interview council staff who might have information. Most refused to talk. They cited confidentiality agreements or claimed they knew nothing useful. But a few were willing to speak off the record. A maintenance worker mentioned seeing armed ships with no identification markings docked at council facilities. A junior analyst remembered being asked to prepare threat assessments on emerging species that were later classified. At the highest levels, the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired council security officer contacted Ryan through an encrypted channel. He said his name was Marcus, and he had worked in facility protection for 30 years, before accepting early retirement 6 months ago. He claimed to have information about the secret operations, but would only meet in person at a location of his choosing, Ryan agreed, despite the obvious risks. He took Nicole and 2 armed security specialists to the meeting. They traveled to a neutral station in unclaimed space. Marcus was waiting in a private room looking nervous but determined. He explained that he had kept quiet about what he knew because he had a family to protect. But watching Kessa risk everything to expose the truth had shamed him into action. Marcus described how he had been assigned to guard a classified DHE, a meeting 5 years ago. The meeting was not on any official schedule. 4 high-ranking council members attended along with military commanders from 3 different species. He was not supposed to listen to the conversation, but the room's soundproofing was imperfect. He heard them discussing plans to eliminate species. They considered threatening before those species could challenge council authority. He provided names. Councilmember Gorath from the Krell species had chaired the meeting. Councilmember Zelana from the Zaros Collective had presented economic analyses, showing how the council could benefit from seizing territory held by targeted species. Military Commander Breck from the Foreign Empire had outlined strategies for conducting attacks that would appear natural or accidental. Council member Durin from the Pelton species had expressed concerns about the moral implications, but was overruled by the others. Ryan recorded every word of Marcus's testimony and asked detailed questions to verify his account. The names matched individuals who had access to the classified accounts Nicole had identified. The timeline matched when the financial irregularities began appearing. This was not proof by itself, but it was a thread they could follow. Nicole continued, digging into the financial records, now focusing specifically on transactions authorized by the 4 council members Marcus had named. She found what she was looking for, buried in budget amendments and emergency expenditure authorizations. Gorath had approved funds for unspecified security operations. Zelana had transferred resources to development projects and systems that coincidentally became targets of mysterious disasters. Breck had requisitioned military equipment without standard documentation. Ryan compiled the evidence into a preliminary report. It showed a clear pattern of conspiracy. The 4 council members had been working together for years to identify emerging species they viewed as threats. They had diverted council resources to fund covert operations against those species. Humanity was simply the latest target on a list that included at least 7 other civilizations. The report detailed how 3 species had experienced sudden population collapses blamed on unknown plagues. 2 had suffered industrial accidents that destroyed their space programs. 1 had faced economic sanctions based on fabricated evidence of treaty violations. Another had simply vanished with all their colonies abandoned, and their people never found. Ryan presented his preliminary findings to the tribunal overseeing the investigation. The lead judge was a Thalan named Mira, who read the report with growing horror. She asked Ryan how confident he was in the evidence. He replied that he would need access to additional records and permission to interview the accused council members directly before he could prove everything beyond doubt. But the pattern was clear and damning. The tribunal voted to expand Ryan's authority. They granted him access to all council records without exception. They authorized him to compel testimony from any individual, including sitting council members. They also placed the 4 accused under travel restrictions to prevent them from fleeing jurisdiction. The investigation was no longer just about the vote to exterminate humanity. It was about uncovering a conspiracy that had been operating for decades. News of the expanded investigation spread across the galaxy within hours. Species that had experienced unexplained disasters began demanding reviews of their cases. Families who had lost loved ones in suspicious accidents called for justice. The council was facing a reckoning that went far beyond one leaked document. Ryan knew the hardest part was still ahead. The conspirators would not go quietly. They had resources and allies throughout the council bureaucracy. They would fight to protect themselves using every legal trick and political maneuver available. But Ryan had spent his career taking down people who thought they were untouchable. He knew how to be patient and thorough. He knew how to build cases that could not be dismissed or ignored. Nicole entered his office late, one evening carrying another set of financial records. She looked exhausted but excited. She had found evidence linking the conspirators to the mysterious organizations that had received the laundered funds. The organizations had purchased weapons and ships. They had hired mercenaries. They had established bases in remote systems. This was not just planning. This was operational infrastructure ready to execute the extinction protocols. Ryan added the new evidence to his growing file. Every piece fit together like parts of a terrible puzzle. The picture it created was one of calculated evil carried out by individuals who believed themselves justified. They had appointed themselves judges of which species deserved to exist. They had acted without oversight or accountability. And they had nearly succeeded in hiding their crimes forever. But one brave Varani diplomat had refused to let them succeed. Kessa had risked everything to shine light on their darkness. Now it was Ryan's job to make sure that light reached every corner of the conspiracy. He would follow the evidence wherever it led. He would document every crime and every victim. And when he was finished, the galaxy would know exactly what had been done in the councils. Naaman, who was responsible, the trial began on a cold morning at council, prime with billions watching from across the galaxy. The courtroom had been specially constructed to accommodate the historic proceedings. Judge Margaret Foster sat at the center bench, flanked by 5 other judges representing different species. Margaret had been selected despite controversy about having a human judge preside over a case involving humanity's attempted extermination. But the other species had insisted. If humans were the victims, they deserved representation in the pursuit of justice. The 4 accused council members sat in separate chambers, designed to hold beings of different physiologies. Goroth, the massive Krell, looked defiant. Zelana from the Zaros Collective appeared calm and calculating. Commander Breck kept his eyes down, avoiding the cameras. Durin the Pelton seemed genuinely troubled, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Special. Investigator Ryan Cole presented the prosecution's case methodically over the first 3 days. He walked the court through every piece of evidence his team had gathered. Financial records showing diverted funds. Testimony from witnesses like Marcus, the security officer. Communications between the conspirators discussing their operations. The pattern was undeniable and overwhelming. Nicole Sanders took the stand on the 4th day to explain how she had traced the money. She displayed charts showing how millions of credits had flowed from council accounts to shadow organizations. She identified specific transactions authorized by each of the accused. Her testimony was technical, but devastating. By the time she finished, even the defense attorneys looked shaken. Captain Daniel Harper testified about receiving the initial leaked documents aboard the Valiant. He described the encryption and the verification process Lieutenant Karen Wells had conducted. He explained why they had believed the files were authentic, why they had felt compelled to transmit them to Earth immediately. His testimony established the chain of evidence that started everything. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Kessa walked to the witness stand with her head held high. She had been granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for her testimony. But everyone knew her life would never be normal again. She had become the most famous whistleblower in galactic history. Some called her a hero. Others called her a traitor. She seemed indifferent to both labels. Kessa described her work in the classified archives and the moment she discovered the Extinction Protocol files. She explained the weeks of anguish, trying to decide what to do. She talked about the fear that kept her awake at night and the conviction that finally pushed her to act. Her voice never wavered as she recounted copying the files and sending them to the humans. She had known it would cost her everything, but some things mattered more than personal safety, The lead defense attorney tried to discredit her during cross-examination. He suggested she had leaked the files out of spite or mental instability. He questioned whether a junior diplomat could really understand the complex security considerations that drove the council's decisions. Kessa listened patiently, then responded with quiet dignity. She said that understanding genocide required no special expertise. It was wrong when it was done openly, and it was wrong when it was done in secret. The council had violated its own laws and betrayed the trust of every species in the galaxy. The next 2 weeks brought a parade of witnesses. Survivors from species that had been targeted by previous operations testified about unexplained plagues and disasters. Medical experts presented evidence that some of these events were not natural but deliberately caused. Military analysts described the covert forces that had been assembled using diverted council funds. Each testimony added another layer to the prosecution's case. The defense tried to argue that the conspirators had acted out of genuine concern for galactic stability. They brought in security experts who claimed that aggressive young species posed real threats to established civilizations. They suggested that difficult decisions sometimes required secrecy to prevent panic. They painted the accused as patriots making hard choices to protect the greater good. But Ryan had anticipated these arguments. He called historians who testified about other governments that had justified atrocities in the name of security. He presented evidence that humanity's expansion was actually less aggressive than that. Of several species the council had never targeted, he demonstrated that the threat assessments used to justify the extinction protocol had been exaggerated or fabricated entirely. The defense case crumbled under the weight of contradictory evidence. Margaret Foster called a recess after 6 weeks of testimony to allow the judges to deliberate. The wait was agonizing for everyone involved. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding justice. Some supported the conspirators, arguing that the council had a right to protect itself, but most wanted convictions. They carried signs with the names of species that had vanished or suffered under the secret operations. They chanted for accountability and transparency. Ambassador Patricia Lane watched the protests from her office window. She had testified earlier in the trial about the chaos in the Grand Assembly when the files first became public. Now she waited like everyone else to see if justice would prevail. She thought about how far they had come since Captain Daniel Harper first sent that encrypted message. The truth had emerged despite enormous efforts to suppress it. But truth alone was not enough. There had to be consequences. The judges returned after 3 days of deliberation. The courtroom fell silent as Margaret Foster read the verdicts. Gorith was found guilty of conspiracy to commit genocide and crimes against sovereign species. Solana was found guilty on the same charges, plus embezzlement of council resources. Commander Breck was found guilty of conspiracy and unauthorized military operations. Duran was found guilty of conspiracy, but the judges noted his documented objections during planning sessions as a mitigating factor. The sentences came next. Gorith and Zalana received life imprisonment without possibility of release. Breck received 40 years. Duran received 20 years with possibility of parole after 10. All 4 were stripped of their positions and banned from holding public office. Their assets were seized to provide reparations to the victims of their operations. The courtroom erupted in applause and shouts. Margaret Foster struck her gavel, calling for order, but even she seemed relieved. Justice had been served, not perfectly, but substantially. The message was clear. No one was above the law, not even the most powerful members of the Galactic Council. But the trial was only the beginning of broader changes. Ambassador Patricia Lane stood before the reformed Grand Assembly 2 weeks later with a proposal that had been drafted by representatives from 50 different species. The proposal called for a complete restructuring of council governance. Secret sessions would be banned, except in the most extreme circumstances, and even then they would require approval from an independent oversight board. All votes on military action would be public and subject to review. An independent inspector general would have authority to investigate any council operation without restriction. The debate over the proposal lasted for months. Conservative species argued that some secrecy was necessary for effective governance. Progressive species countered that the conspiracy had proven why unchecked power was dangerous. Compromise amendments were offered and rejected. Alliances formed and dissolved. The future of the council hung in the balance. Finally, the vote was called. Species representatives entered their decisions into the electronic system one by one. The results appeared on massive displays throughout the chamber. In favor 4,200 species, opposed 341, abstaining 112. The reforms had passed by an overwhelming margin. Captain Daniel Harper attended the signing ceremony as a guest of honor. He stood beside Kessa, who had been granted asylum on Earth after the Varani government pardoned her completely. They watched as delegates from across the galaxy added their marks to the new charter. Director Helen Morris was there representing Earth's government along with President Jacob Turner. Ryan Cole attended with his investigation team, knowing their work had made this moment possible. The ceremony included speeches from species that had suffered under the old system. They talked about loss and grief, but also about hope. The galaxy had stared into darkness and chosen light. It had confronted evil and demanded better. The new charter would not prevent all future abuses, but it would make them much harder to hide. Margaret Foster gave the closing address. She spoke about the importance of transparency and accountability in any system of government. She praised the courage of individuals like Kessa, who risked everything to do what was right. She acknowledged that the road ahead would be difficult. Rebuilding trust after such betrayal would take generations, but the foundation had been laid for something better than what came before. As the ceremony ended and delegates began to leave, Daniel found himself talking with a Thalan philosopher named Ven. The elderly being looked at him with something like approval in his ancient eyes. He said that humanity had taught the galaxy an important lesson. Power without accountability becomes tyranny. Secrets without oversight become weapons. By refusing to accept injustice, even when facing extinction, humanity had forced the entire galaxy to confront its failures. Daniel smiled, thinking about all the humans who had fought to expose the truth. They had simply done what needed to be done when confronted with evil. They had refused to be silent. They had demanded justice, not just for themselves, but for all species who might face similar threats in the future. That was what it meant to be human. Not aggression or unpredictability, but the stubborn insistence that right mattered more than might. The Galactic Council had voted to erase humanity because they feared what humans might become. Instead, humanity had proven what they already were: a species that valued truth over comfort, that demanded justice over expedience, that fought not just for survival, but for principles worth surviving for. The Council's secret had been exposed, and the galaxy was better for it. This was not the end humanity's enemies had planned, but it was the beginning the galaxy needed.